The toothpick. Marcus Tank Sullivan watched from the shadows behind camera B as Brad Kellerman's world began to crumble, one splinter at a time. The toothpick sat innocuously on the registration desk like a loaded weapon nobody else could see. Chuck Norris had returned to center stage, hands clasped behind his back, waiting. The charity crowd, 200 military families, studio executives, and press, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Something electric crackled in the air, the kind of tension Tank recognized from 20 years of coordinating fight scenes. Except this wasn't choreographed. Kellerman pocketed his phone with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never faced real consequences. At 34, he still carried himself like the teenage heartthrob who'd charmed his way out of every mistake. "All right, let's get this show moving," he announced to the crowd, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, some old-school martial arts with Chuck, Mr. Kellerman." Chuck's voice cut through the soundstage like a blade through silk. Quiet, precise. "You're late. Yeah, well, time is money in this business, Chuck. I'm sure you understand." Tank felt his stomach drop. 20 years of keeping secrets. 20 years of watching Kellerman's star rise while his own soul rotted, and it was all about to implode because the golden boy couldn't show basic respect. Chuck walked to the registration desk and picked up the toothpick. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, studying it like a jeweler examining a diamond. "This represents something, Brad. Want to guess what?" Kellerman's smile faltered. The crowd leaned forward. Even the camera operators stopped adjusting their equipment. Lunch?" Kellerman's laugh sounded forced, nervous. "Respect." Chuck stepped closer. The smallest gesture, costs nothing, weighs nothing, but without it, he snapped the toothpick in half. The crack echoed through the soundstage like a gunshot. Tank's hands trembled as he gripped his clipboard. He should walk away. Should have walked away 20 years ago when he first helped Kellerman cover up the blood on that Malibu road. But he stayed frozen, watching Chuck Norris orchestrate what looked like the quietest demolition in Hollywood history. "You know what happens when someone shows disrespect to veterans' families?" Chuck continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. "When someone thinks their business call matters more than honoring those who served?" Kellerman's publicist materialized at the edge of the stage, frantically typing on her phone. Tank could practically see the damage control wheels spinning. But some things couldn't be managed or spun. Chuck placed the broken toothpick halves on the desk with surgical precision. 6 minutes, Brad. That's how long you kept these families waiting. That's how long you kept me waiting." He turned to face the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. Today's demonstration is canceled." The murmur that rippled through the audience sounded like distant thunder. Tank watched studio executives pulling out their phones, entertainment reporters scribbling notes, social media managers already crafting posts. In the digital age, 6 minutes was enough time to destroy a reputation that had taken decades to build. Kellerman stepped forward, panic creeping into his voice. "Wait, Chuck, let's not be hasty here. We can work this out." But Chuck was already walking toward the exit. He paused only to address the crowd one final time. "Respect is earned through actions, not words. Today, you've seen the difference." As the martial arts legend disappeared through the soundstage doors, Tank felt something shift in the atmosphere. The carefully constructed bubble of protection around Kellerman, the one Tank had helped build with his silence, suddenly felt fragile as glass. Kellerman stood alone under the harsh stage lights, his designer clothes and perfect hair suddenly looking like costume pieces from a play that had ended mid-scene. The crowd began to disperse, their disappointed faces telling the story that would spread through Hollywood faster than wildfire. Tank's phone buzzed. Text message, unknown number. "Marcus Sullivan. We need to talk. CN." The blood drained from Tank's face. In 20 years of stunt coordination, he'd never worked directly with Chuck Norris, had never even met the man. How did Chuck know his name? How did Chuck have his number? Another buzz. Another message. Sunset Boulevard. Musso and Franks. 1 hour. Come alone. It's time to discuss what really happened in Malibu. June 2003. Tank's clipboard clattered to the floor. June 2003. The night that haunted his dreams. The night Sarah Morrison, 16 years old, died on that rain-slicked road while Kellerman stumbled drunk from his wrecked Ferrari. The night tank chose money over conscience and helped stage the cover-up that launched Kellerman's career into the stratosphere. As chaos erupted around the failed charity event, Tank realized that Chuck Norris hadn't just destroyed Kellerman's afternoon. He'd fired the opening shot in a war that had been 20 years in the making, and Tank was about to become ground zero. He grabbed his keys and ran for the exit, the broken toothpick fragments watching his retreat like tiny wooden witnesses to the beginning of the end. The weight of years. Tank's Ford F-150 shuddered to life in the studio parking lot, the engine coughing like a 60-year-old smoker. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against the cracked leather. 20 years of California sun had beaten the truck's paint job into submission, same as it had done to Tank's face, same as guilt had done to his soul. The drive from the soundstage to his trailer in Palmdale would take 45 minutes. The meeting with Chuck Norris was in an hour. The math didn't work, but Tank couldn't face Musso and Franks yet. Not when his entire world was collapsing in slow motion. He needed to see home first, needed to remember what he stood to lose. Highway 14 stretched ahead like a gray ribbon through the desert, past fast food joints and strip malls that existed in the shadow of Los Angeles dreams. Tank had made this drive thousands of times, watching the city's glitter fade into scrubland and honest poverty. Out here, people didn't pretend to be something they weren't. Out here, Tank could almost forget the blood on his hands. His phone sat silent in the cup holder, but those two messages burned in his memory like brands. CN Chuck Norris somehow knew everything. Knew Tank's name, his number, his darkest secret. The night Sarah Morrison died and Tank helped make it disappear. The trailer park appeared through the heat shimmer, a collection of weathered aluminum boxes surrounded by chain-link fence and dying palm trees. Desert Wind's mobile home community, the kind of place where people came to disappear, not to be found. Tank had lived in Space 47 for 8 years, ever since his second divorce, and the slow realization that Hollywood had chewed him up and spit him out somewhere between useful and expendable. He pulled into the gravel driveway beside his double-wide, the aluminum siding bleached white by the relentless sun. The small garden Rosie had started before her cancer diagnosis still struggled along the front steps, tomato plants and desert sage that somehow survived on stubbornness and twice-weekly watering. Tank tended them now, though he'd never been good with growing things, only good at destroying them. The screen door protested with a familiar squeal as he stepped inside. The trailer smelled like coffee and the lavender air freshener his daughter Emma had bought him last Christmas. She worried about him living alone out here, called every Sunday from Portland where she was raising 2 kids and pretending her father wasn't a broken-down stuntman with too many secrets. Tank stood in the narrow hallway, surrounded by the accumulated debris of a life half-lived. Framed photos lined the fake wood paneling. Emma's wedding, her kids' school pictures, his army unit in Desert Storm, Rosie in her nurse's uniform before the chemo stole her smile. No pictures from movie sets, no celebrity handshakes or stunt awards. Those belonged to a different man, one who'd sold his integrity for a check and 20 years of silence. The refrigerator hummed in the tiny kitchen, covered with Emma's kids' drawings held by souvenir magnets from places Tank had never visited. World's best grandpa, according to a crayon masterpiece from 7-year-old Tyler. The kid didn't know his grandfather was a coward who'd watched a drunk movie star leave a teenage girl to die. Tank pulled a beer from the refrigerator, then put it back. He needed clarity now, not numbness. The kitchen window looked out over the desert toward the San Gabriel Mountains, purple shadows in the afternoon light. Somewhere beyond those peaks, Chuck Norris was waiting with questions Tank had prayed would never come. His phone rang. Emma's ringtone, Sweet Caroline, because she'd been born the year Neil Diamond's song topped the charts. "Hey, sweetheart." Tank forced lightness into his voice. "Dad, you sound weird. Everything okay?" Emma had inherited her mother's ability to read people through their voices. At 32, she was everything Tank had never managed to be. Honest, steady, unafraid of the truth. Just tired, honey. Long day at work. The charity thing with that actor you mentioned? The handsome one from those action movies? Brad Kellerman. Tank's mouth tasted like ashes. Yeah, that's done. Well, get some rest. Tyler has a soccer game Saturday if you want to drive up. He keeps asking when Grandpa Tank is coming to visit. Tank closed his eyes. Emma's voice, her kids' laughter, the promise of normal Sunday dinners and bedtime stories. Everything that mattered, everything Chuck Norris could destroy with a single phone call to the right reporter. "I'll be there," Tank said, though he wasn't sure he'd be free to keep that promise. After Emma hung up, Tank sat at his small kitchen table and stared at the phone. Chuck Norris was waiting. The past was calling in its debts. Time to face what he'd helped create 20 years ago. The call. Tank's finger hovered over Chuck Norris's contact information for 30 seconds before he realized he was holding his breath. The desert wind rattled the trailer's aluminum siding, a metallic percussion that matched the hammering in his chest. He'd missed the Musso and Frank's meeting. That had been 2 hours ago. The phone felt like it weighed 50 pounds. He set it on the kitchen table and walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The mirror showed him what 20 years of guilt looked like. Deep lines carved around gray eyes, silver stubble on a jaw that used to be granite. At 58, he looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd been carrying a dead girl's ghost on his shoulders for 2 decades. When he returned to the kitchen, the phone was ringing. Unknown number. But Tank knew who it was before he answered. "Mr. Sullivan." Chuck's voice carried the same quiet authority it had on the soundstage, but there was something else now. Disappointment. "You missed our appointment." Tank's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I couldn't make it." Couldn't or wouldn't. Tank stared out the kitchen window at the desert. A roadrunner darted between the sagebrush, chasing something invisible. "Does it matter?" "Everything matters, Marcus. That's what I learned 20 years ago when a 16-year-old girl died and nobody seemed to care about the truth." The words hit Tank like a physical blow. He sank into the kitchen chair, the cheap vinyl creaking under his weight. "How did you find out?" Chuck's voice remained conversational, almost gentle. Sarah Morrison's mother never stopped asking questions, never stopped believing her daughter deserved justice. "When Margaret Morrison calls me every year on the anniversary, telling me about the cover-up, about the witnesses who disappeared, about the stunt coordinator who suddenly had enough money to pay off his house, I listen." Tank's mouth went dry. Margaret Morrison. He remembered her from the police station that night, a broken woman in a blood-stained sweater, demanding answers that nobody would give her. She'd looked right through him when he gave his statement. The carefully rehearsed lies about timeline and visibility and Brad Kellerman's imaginary sobriety. "She doesn't know anything," Tank whispered. "She knows enough. Security footage from the gas station, timestamps that don't match your statement, the fact that Kellerman's publicist paid for your mortgage 2 weeks after the accident." Chuck paused. "She knows you were there, Marcus. She just doesn't know what you saw." Tank closed his eyes. The night came flooding back like it always did. The call at 11:47 p.m., Kellerman's voice slurred and panicked on the phone. The drive to Malibu through the rain. Finding the Ferrari wrapped around an oak tree, its front end crumpled, windshield spiderwebbed with impact. And 30 feet away, Sarah Morrison's broken body in the road, her prom dress torn and bloody, her eyes staring at nothing. "The girl was already dead," Tank said, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. "There was nothing anyone could do. But there was something you could do about the driver who killed her." Tank stood up abruptly, pacing the narrow kitchen. "You don't understand. Kellerman was just a kid himself, 19 years old. His future was built on her grave." Chuck's voice hardened. "And you held the shovel." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Tank wanted to deny it, to explain about the money, about his own daughter's medical bills, about the impossible choice between destroying one life and saving another. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. "What do you want from me?" Tank asked finally. "The truth. All of it. What happened that night, who paid you to lie, how deep the cover-up goes." Chuck paused. "And I want you to help me give Margaret Morrison the justice she's been waiting 20 years to receive." "I can't. I won't." Tank's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. "You have no idea what this would do. My daughter, my grandkids." Sarah Morrison's mother buried an empty coffin, Marcus. Closed casket because her daughter's face was too destroyed to repair. She spent 2 decades watching Brad Kellerman's movies, watching him get rich and famous off the career your silence made possible. Every premiere, every award show, every magazine cover is a knife in that woman's heart. Tank felt something breaking inside his chest. Why now? Why wait 20 years? Because I finally have proof. Security footage from a traffic camera that wasn't discovered until last month. Kellerman's car running the red light at 60 miles an hour. Time-stamped 11 minutes before your official report says the accident occurred. The room spun. Tank gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, his knuckles white. 11 minutes. Enough time to stage a scene. Enough time to sober Kellerman up and get their stories straight. Enough time to move a body and make murder look like tragedy. The footage goes public tomorrow, Chuck continued. Unless you help me build a real case. Unless you finally tell the truth about what Brad Kellerman did to Sarah Morrison. Tank's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the linoleum floor. Outside, the desert wind howled like the voices of the dead, and Tank realized that his old life, the silence, the secrets, the careful distance from the past, was over. Chuck Norris had just detonated a bomb 20 years in the making, and Tank was standing at ground zero. Early development. Tank stared at his phone on the linoleum floor, its black screen reflecting the fluorescent kitchen light like a dead eye. The trailer's silence pressed against his eardrums. No desert wind, no rattling aluminum, just the terrible quiet that follows an explosion. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when he'd finally found something resembling peace in this aluminum box surrounded by desert and dying dreams. He picked up the phone with trembling fingers and scrolled to his contacts. Jerry Mazzetti, his old friend from the stunt community, the one guy who'd kept in touch after Tank's exile to the trailer park. Jerry knew everyone, heard everything. If Chuck Norris was making moves, Jerry would know about it. The phone rang 4 times before Jerry's gravelly voice answered. Tank? Jesus, what time is... Jerry, I need to ask you something. Tank paced to the kitchen window, watching heat shimmer rise from the gravel. Chuck Norris, you heard anything about him sniffing around old accident reports? Silence stretched like a held breath. Jerry? Tank, listen to me very carefully. Jerry's voice had gone flat. Careful. Whatever Chuck Norris wants from you, give it to him. Don't fight it. Don't try to run from it. Just cooperate. What the hell does that mean? It means I've seen what happens to people who get on his bad side. Remember Tommy Castellano? Used to run security for the big studios? Tank remembered Tommy. A mountain of a man who could make problems disappear with a phone call and a stack of hundreds. Connected, feared, untouchable. Tommy tried to stonewall Chuck 3 years ago over some missing charity funds. Nothing major, just skimmed percentages that nobody was supposed to notice. Jerry's voice dropped to a whisper. Within a week, the IRS had Tommy's books. FBI was crawling through his house. Every dirty deal he'd ever made came spilling out like a broken sewer line. That's just coincidence. Tommy's doing 12 to 15 in federal lockup, Tank. Coincidence my ass. Jerry paused. Chuck Norris doesn't threaten people. He doesn't make demands. He just states facts and lets gravity do the work. Tank felt the walls of the trailer closing in. There has to be a way to fix this. Some kind of deal. Fix what? Tank, what did you do? The question hung there, like a loaded gun. Tank closed his eyes, seeing Sarah Morrison's broken face in the rain, her prom dress torn and bloody. Nothing. I didn't do anything. Bullshit. Jerry's voice hardened. You don't sound like this over nothing. You sound like a man with a body buried in his backyard. Tank ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Marcus Fielding, Kellerman's longtime publicist and crisis manager. If anyone knew how to make this disappear, it would be Fielding. The call went straight to voicemail. Tank tried again, same result. He scrolled through his contacts, finding other numbers from his old life. Stunt coordinators, studio executives, fixers who specialized in making inconvenient truths vanish. One by one, the calls went unanswered or straight to voicemail. By the 7th attempt, Tank realized what was happening. Word was already out. Chuck Norris had made his intentions known, and the Hollywood machine was already distancing itself from ground zero. His phone buzzed. Text message. Tank, can't talk now. Whatever this is about, handle it yourself. Don't call again. Fielding. Then another. Sorry, buddy. Got nothing for you on this one. Good luck. Bobby Chen, Paramount Security. And another. Heard you might be having some trouble. Can't help. Steve Martinez, CAA. Tank watched his old network evaporate in real time. 20 years of professional relationships dissolving like sugar and acid. They weren't just refusing to help, they were running, sprinting away from whatever Chuck Norris was building. He tried one last number, Brad Kellerman's personal cell, the one he'd called that terrible night in 2003. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Tank laughed, a bitter sound in the empty trailer. Kellerman had already burned his phone, already started covering his tracks. The golden boy knew exactly what was coming. The refrigerator hummed. Tyler's crayon drawing of World's Best Grandpa stared down from its magnet, innocent and trusting. Emma's wedding photo smiled from the hallway wall. All of it, the family dinners, the soccer games, the Sunday phone calls, balanced on the edge of a precipice. Tank walked to his bedroom closet and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper like a museum piece, was the check stub from June 2003. Kellerman's publicist had been careful. It looked like payment for stunt coordination on a film that was never made. But Tank knew what it really was, the price of a 16-year-old girl's life, $50,000. Enough to pay Emma's medical bills when her appendix nearly killed her that summer. Enough to keep his daughter alive while helping to bury someone else's. His phone rang. Chuck Norris again. This time, Tank answered on the first ring. "I'm listening," he said. "Good. Because Margaret Morrison deserves to know what really happened to her daughter. And you're going to help me tell her." Tank stared at the check stub, 20 years of guilt made manifest in faded ink. Outside, the desert stretched toward mountains that looked like sleeping giants. There was nowhere left to run. Middle development. "She lives in Bakersfield now," Chuck said, his voice cutting through the static of Tank's collapsing world. "Small apartment near the hospital where she works nights cleaning floors. 61 years old, arthritic hands, but she still sends me a Christmas card every year with Sarah's school picture taped inside." Tank set the check stub on his kitchen table, the faded ink catching the overhead light. "You don't have to do this." 20 years ago, Margaret Morrison sat in a police station for 14 hours, waiting for answers that never came. She identified her daughter's body through a dental record because Brad Kellerman's Ferrari turned Sarah's face into hamburger. Chuck's words fell like hammer blows. She buried her only child and went back to cleaning other people's messes because the settlement money ran out in 2007. Settlement money? Tank's voice cracked. Kellerman's insurance company. They paid Margaret $200,000 to go away quietly. She thought it meant justice was coming later. Chuck paused. It never did. Tank walked to the kitchen sink, gripping the edge until his knuckles went white. Through the window, the desert stretched endlessly, but he felt trapped in a coffin 6 feet underground. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell me about the 11 minutes. What 11 minutes? Between when Kellerman killed Sarah and when you called 911. 11 minutes to stage a crime scene. 11 minutes to turn vehicular homicide into tragic accident." Chuck's voice remained steady, implacable. 11 minutes that destroyed a mother's life and built a movie star's career. Tank's legs gave out. He slumped into the kitchen chair, staring at Tyler's crayon drawing on the refrigerator. "World's best grandpa." The words felt like mockery now. What kind of grandfather helped cover up the murder of somebody else's child? "I can't," Tank whispered. "You can't, or you won't." "Both." Tank's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. "You think this is just about me? My daughter has 2 kids, Chuck, a mortgage, a life built on the belief that her father is a decent man. Your daughter wasn't driving drunk through Malibu Canyon at 80 miles an hour. Emma was dying." The words exploded out of Tank like shrapnel. Summer of 2003, her appendix ruptured. Peritonitis. The doctor said she needed surgery immediately or she'd be dead in 6 hours. His voice cracked. My insurance had lapsed. The hospital wanted 50,000 up front. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and Tank's ragged breathing. "So you chose," Chuck said finally. "I chose my daughter's life over justice for a dead stranger." "Yes." Tank stared at the check stub, remembering Emma's pale face in the ICU, the monitors beeping like a countdown to eternity. "I'd make the same choice again. Even knowing what Kellerman became, what your silence enabled." Tank's throat tightened. He'd watched Kellerman's career explode after 2003. Blockbuster after blockbuster, magazine covers, award shows, a golden boy untouched by scandal. But there had been other stories too, whispered rumors that never quite reached print. A young actress who'd fallen downstairs after rejecting Kellerman's advances. A stunt woman whose career ended when she threatened to expose his on-set drinking. A production assistant who'd disappeared for 3 days after a rap party, turning up in a hospital with no memory of what happened. "That's not on me," Tank said, but the words felt hollow. "Isn't it? You gave him immunity, Marcus. Your silence was his license to destroy anyone who got in his way." Chuck's voice hardened. "How many Sarah Morrisons have there been since 2003? Tank closed his eyes, but he could see their faces anyway. Young women whose stories never made headlines, whose pain was buried under non-disclosure agreements and hush money. His silence hadn't just covered up one crime, it had enabled decades of them. "Margaret Morrison calls me every June 20th, Chuck continued. "Sarah's birthday. She tells me about the life her daughter should have had. College graduation, wedding day, grandchildren who'll never exist because Brad Kellerman was too drunk to see a stop sign. Stop. She shows me the letters Sarah was writing to UCLA admissions, the scholarship applications, the diary entries about becoming a pediatric nurse like her mother." Chuck's voice dropped to a whisper. "Margaret reads me those entries every year, Marcus. Dreams that died on Malibu Canyon Road while you helped the killer walk away clean." Tank felt something breaking inside his chest, 20 years of carefully constructed justifications crumbling like sandcastles. Emma was alive because Sarah Morrison was dead. His grandchildren existed because Margaret Morrison would never have any. The equation was simple, brutal, and unforgivable. "What happens to my family when this comes out?" Tank asked. "That depends on you. Cooperate with the investigation, and maybe we can control the narrative. Keep lying." Chuck paused. "Well, you've seen what happened to everyone else who crossed me." Tank stared at Tyler's drawing, innocent crayon strokes spelling out a love he no longer deserved. The reckoning had finally come. Tank's phone rang again. Not Chuck Norris this time. His daughter Emma's name lit up the screen, her smiling face from last Christmas staring back at him like an accusation. "Hi, Dad. Just wanted to check on you before the kids' bedtime." Tyler insisted on calling Grandpa before his bath. Tank's throat constricted. "Emma, Grandpa!" Tyler's voice exploded through the speaker, pure joy and excitement. "Guess what? I lost my first tooth. Mom says the tooth fairy's gonna come tonight." Tank stared at the check stub on his table, 50,000 pieces of silver. That's wonderful, buddy. Mom says you used to catch tooth fairies when you were little. Is that true?" The innocent question hit Tank like a physical blow. More lies. His whole relationship with his grandson built on a foundation of deception, just like everything else in his life since that night in 2003. "Dad?" Emma's voice returned, concern creeping in. "You sound weird. Are you okay?" Tank opened his mouth to lie again, to say he was fine, just tired, nothing to worry about. But something had broken inside him during Chuck's call, some fundamental piece of his ability to pretend. "Emma, I need to tell you something about the night you were sick, about where the money for your surgery really came from." "What money?" "Dad, you're scaring me." Tank looked at Tyler's drawing again, those crooked crayon letters spelling out "World's Best Grandpa," a title he'd never deserved, earned through blood money and a dead girl's silence. "I lied to you about everything. The insurance didn't cover your surgery because I'd let the policy lapse to pay gambling debts. And the money for the hospital," Tank's voice cracked. "I didn't borrow it from friends." "Dad, what are you talking about?" Before Tank could answer, another call came through, Brad Kellerman's name flashing on the screen. Somehow the movie star had gotten a new phone, tracked down Tank's number despite all his precautions. "Emma, I have to go, but we need to talk soon. Really talk." Tank switched to the other call before his daughter could respond. "Marcus, my old friend." Kellerman's voice was smooth as silk, that trademark charisma that had charmed audiences for 2 decades. "Heard you've been having some interesting conversations today." "Brad." Tank's voice was flat. "Thought you'd burned your phone. Old habits. Listen, I'm flying into Burbank tonight. Private jet, very discreet. We should meet face to face, hash this out like civilized men." Tank almost laughed. Civilized men. As if there was anything civilized about what they'd done. 20 years of silence, Marcus. 20 years of keeping each other's secrets safe. That has to count for something. Your secret. I kept your secret. Tank stood up, pacing the narrow kitchen. "I never asked you to kill that girl." "Kill?" Kellerman's voice sharpened, the charm evaporating like morning dew. "Jesus Christ, Marcus. It was an accident. A tragic, horrible accident. 80 miles an hour through a red light. Blood alcohol twice the legal limit." Tank's voice rose. "That's not an accident, Brad. That's murder." "Watch your mouth." The movie star's mask had slipped completely now, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "You were paid handsomely for your discretion. $50,000 that saved your daughter's life. Don't pretend you're some kind of victim here." Tank felt something click into place, like a puzzle piece he'd been forcing into the wrong spot for 20 years. "You've been keeping track of me." "Of course I have. Insurance policy. I know about Emma's wedding, about the grandkids, about every major moment in your life since 2003. Kellerman's voice turned silky again, but with an edge like a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "I know Tyler just lost his first tooth tonight. Adorable kid." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Tank's blood turned to ice water. "If you're thinking about talking to Chuck Norris, I'd reconsider. Very carefully." Kellerman paused. "Accidents happen, Marcus, even to loving fathers and devoted grandfathers." Tank gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. There it was, the real Brad Kellerman, stripped of Hollywood glamour and revealed for what he truly was. Not a reformed man haunted by youthful mistakes, but a predator who'd been perfecting his craft for 20 years. "You son of a bitch." "I'm the son of a bitch who made you rich enough to save your daughter's life. Don't forget that when Chuck Norris comes calling with his righteous indignation." Kellerman's voice hardened. "Some secrets are worth keeping, Marcus. For everyone's sake." The line went dead. Tank stared at his phone, finally understanding the true scope of his prison. He hadn't just covered up one crime, he'd become an accessory to decades of them, complicit in every life Kellerman had destroyed since Sarah Morrison. And now his own family was in the crosshairs. Tank looked at Tyler's drawing one last time, then crumpled it in his fist. The tooth fairy wasn't coming tonight. Only monsters remained. Tank smoothed out Tyler's drawing against the kitchen table, his weathered hands shaking as he tried to flatten the wrinkles. The crayon marks had smeared where his fist had crushed them, but the words were still readable. "World's best grandpa." Each letter felt like an indictment now. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Dad, you really worried me. Call me back when you can. We love you." 3 words that used to bring him comfort now felt like nails in his coffin. They loved Marcus Sullivan, devoted father and doting grandfather. They didn't know about Tank Sullivan, the man who'd helped a killer walk free for the price of medical bills. Another buzz. This time an unknown number. Burbank Airport, Hangar 7. Midnight. Come alone or your family learns what kind of man you really are. B. Tank stared at the message until the screen went dark, his own haggard reflection staring back from the black glass. 58 years old, 20 of them spent looking over his shoulder, and it all came down to this: a midnight meeting in an airport hangar with a monster wearing a movie star's face. He walked to his bedroom closet and pulled down another box, this one heavier than the first. Inside, wrapped in an oil-stained rag, was A38 Special he'd bought after the Sarah Morrison incident. 20 years of telling himself it was for protection, but protection from what? From whom? From the moment when Brad Kellerman decided Tank knew too much. The gun felt alien in his hands, cold and purposeful. He'd never fired it outside a shooting range, never pointed it at another human being. But as he checked the cylinder, 6 bullets, all accounted for. Tank wondered if tonight might be different. His phone rang. Chuck Norris again. "Marcus, we need to talk. Face to face. Kellerman wants to meet tonight. Midnight at Burbank. Don't go. It's a trap." Tank almost laughed. Everything was a trap now. 20 years ago, he'd walked into Kellerman's web thinking he was saving his daughter's life. Instead, he'd become another fly wrapped in silk, waiting to be devoured when the spider grew hungry. "He threatened my family, Chuck. My grandson. He knows Tyler lost his tooth tonight, knows details about my life that—" Tank's voice trailed off. "How long has he been watching me?" "Probably since the beginning. Men like Kellerman don't leave loose ends untied." Chuck's voice was grim. "Listen to me carefully. I'm 30 minutes out from your location. Don't go anywhere until I get there." "Why?" Tank set the gun on his kitchen table next to Tyler's drawing. Why does Chuck Norris give a damn about Margaret Morrison, about Sarah, about any of this? Silence stretched between them, long enough that Tank thought the call had dropped. "Because I was supposed to be there that night," Chuck said finally. "June 20th, 2003. Sarah Morrison was walking home from a birthday party for my neighbor's daughter. The Stevensons, good people, old friends. Sarah was their babysitter." Tank's stomach dropped. "I'd promised to give Sarah a ride home. She was a sweet kid, wanted to be a stunt performer like her dad. He'd been killed on a movie set 2 years earlier, faulty rigging on a Western. Sarah used to ask me about the business, about following in his footsteps safely." Chuck's voice grew heavy. "But I got called away on an emergency. Last-minute meeting with some studio executives that couldn't wait." Tank closed his eyes, seeing the collision from a new angle. Sarah Morrison walking alone because Chuck Norris wasn't there to drive her home. Kellerman's Ferrari screaming through the intersection because the universe had aligned every piece perfectly for tragedy. "So I got the call at 2:17 a.m., Chuck continued. Margaret Morrison in hysterics, barely coherent. "They killed my baby, Mr. Norris. They killed my Sarah, and nobody cares. The police cared. There was an investigation. There was a cover-up. And it worked, because professionals like you made it work." Chuck's voice hardened. "I tried to find the truth then, but the machinery was already in motion. Reports disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence got lost in paperwork shuffles." Tank thought about those 11 minutes again. 11 minutes to move Kellerman from the driver's seat. 11 minutes to splash whiskey on Sarah's clothes, making her smell like the drunk teenager who'd stumbled into traffic. 11 minutes to position the cars just right, creating a narrative that absolved the real killer. It had been elegant work, professional. Tank had hated himself for how good he was at it. Margaret Morrison spent 20 years believing her daughter died because Sarah had been drinking at a high school party, Chuck said. She blamed herself for not being stricter, for not picking Sarah up personally. That guilt ate her alive from the inside. Tank stared at the gun on his table. 6 bullets. Kellerman would only need 1. "I promised Margaret I'd find the truth someday," Chuck said. 20 years later, I finally can keep that promise. With your help." Outside, Tank heard the distant rumble of an engine approaching. Through his window, he saw headlights cutting through the desert darkness, still miles away but closing fast. The reckoning was accelerating. Tank grabbed the .38 Special from the table as the headlights drew closer, his finger instinctively finding the trigger guard. 20 years of paranoia crystallizing into a single moment. Was this Chuck Norris arriving early, or Kellerman coming to tie up loose ends before their midnight appointment? "Stay on the line," Chuck's voice crackled through the phone. "If that's not me approaching, you need to know something else. About what happened to the other witnesses from that night." The headlights slowed, turning into Tank's dirt driveway. Through the dust-caked windshield, Tank could see a familiar silhouette, broad shoulders, confident posture. But something was wrong. The timing was off. Chuck had said 30 minutes, but barely 10 had passed. "The tow truck driver who moved the cars," Chuck continued, his voice urgent now. "Jimmy Castellanos. Overdose in 2005. Suspicious circumstances." Tank's blood chilled. He remembered Jimmy. Nervous kid, early 20s, desperate for work. Tank had slipped him $2,000 to keep quiet about the switch they'd made. moving Kellerman's Ferrari to make the scene look right. The paramedic who falsified Sarah's blood alcohol reading. Maria Santos, car accident in 2007, brake failure on the 405. The vehicle outside had stopped, engine still running. No one got out. Tank could see the driver through the windshield now. Definitely not Chuck Norris. Younger, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Chuck, someone's here. It's not you. Get out. Now. Back door, into the desert. I'm 5 minutes behind them. Tank was already moving, stuffing the gun into his waistband and grabbing Tyler's crumpled drawing from the table. Somehow that seemed important, keeping that piece of innocence close, even as everything else collapsed around him. He heard car doors slam as he slipped out his trailer's rear exit. 2 men, maybe 3, their voices low but urgent, professional. This wasn't Kellerman himself. This was cleanup crew, sent to eliminate the last witness before Chuck Norris could extract the truth. Tank moved through the desert scrub as quietly as 2 decades of stunt work had taught him, his boots finding purchase on rocks and avoiding the loose sand that would betray his position. Behind him, he heard his front door splinter as they kicked it in. Not here, a voice called. Check the bedroom. Tank's phone buzzed, a text message. In the pale moonlight, he could read Kellerman's words, "Sorry, Marcus. Business is business. Your family will never know what really happened to you. Another tragic accident in the desert." Rage flooded through Tank's chest, white-hot and purifying. 20 years of guilt and fear crystallized into something harder, more focused. Kellerman wasn't just threatening him anymore. He was threatening Emma, threatening Tyler, threatening the only pure things left in Tank's corrupted world. Tank stopped running and turned around. Behind him, flashlight beams swept through his trailer's windows. They'd search methodically, professionally, then expand their perimeter into the desert. Standard tracking protocol. But these weren't desert rats. They were city operators, probably brought in from Los Angeles. They'd expect him to run, to try escaping deeper into the wilderness. Instead, Tank circled back. No sign of him inside, one of the searchers reported into a radio. Vehicle's still here, though. Can't have gone far. Tank crept closer, using his own trailer as cover. Through the kitchen window, he could see them, 3 men in dark clothes, moving with military precision. The lead man was older, scarred, someone who'd done this kind of work before. The other 2 were muscle, young and eager. Tank pulled out his phone and dialed Chuck's number. "Marcus, where are you?" "Still here. They're in my trailer." Tank's voice was barely a whisper. "Chuck, I need you to know something. About that night. About what really happened. Save it for when you're safe." Tank watched the searchers emerge from his trailer, fanning out to check the surrounding area. If this goes wrong, if Kellerman wins, you need the truth. Sarah Morrison wasn't just walking home from a party. Tank took a breath, the words scraping his throat like broken glass. She was coming to see me, about her father's death on that movie set. She'd found evidence, photos, documents, proving his rigging failure wasn't an accident, it was sabotage. Kellerman was the second unit director on that film. He'd ordered the rigging changes that killed Sarah's father. The silence on the phone was deafening. Sarah Morrison was going to expose him, Tank continued. She called me that night, said she had proof, said she was walking to my hotel to show me everything. Kellerman was following her, trying to intercept her before she reached me. Jesus Christ. He didn't just kill her by accident, Chuck. He hunted her down to silence her. Tank's voice cracked, and I helped him get away with murdering the daughter of a man he'd already killed. In the distance, Tank heard the rumble of another engine, Chuck Norris arriving at last. The final confrontation was about to begin. The 3 black SUVs arrived like a funeral procession, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Tank watched from behind a cluster of Joshua trees as Chuck Norris stepped out of the lead vehicle, flanked by men Tank recognized from 20 years of Hollywood productions, federal marshals probably, or ex-military. The kind of backup that suggested Chuck's investigation had grown beyond personal vengeance into something official. Kellerman's men never stood a chance. The takedown was swift and surgical. Within minutes, all 3 were zip-tied and loading into the SUVs while Chuck approached the spot where Tank had taken cover. "It's over," Chuck said simply. Tank emerged from the shadows, Tyler's drawing still clutched in his fist. The others? The ones he killed to cover his tracks? Jimmy Castellanos' sister has been asking questions for 15 years. Maria Santos left behind 2 kids who never believed the brake failure story. Chuck's face was grim in the moonlight. Federal prosecutors have been building a case. They just needed someone willing to tell the truth. Tank looked back at his trailer, windows still glowing from the searchers' abandoned flashlights. 20 years of hiding in the desert, and it all ended in a few minutes of violence followed by bureaucratic precision. What happens to my family? Witness protection if you want it. Clean slate, new identities. Chuck studied Tank's weathered face. Or you testify and take your chances. Margaret Morrison deserved better than dying without knowing the truth about her daughter. The weight of 2 decades pressed down on Tank's shoulders. Emma's medical bills, Tyler's college fund, all of it built on Sarah Morrison's blood. But underneath the guilt, something else stirred, a feeling he'd almost forgotten existed. Relief. I'll testify, Tank said. Emma and Tyler deserve to know who their father and grandfather really is. 6 months later. The courtroom was smaller than Tank had expected, cramped and institutional. Nothing like the dramatic cathedral spaces he'd seen in movies. Kellerman sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit, his movie star charisma reduced to a desperate sheen of sweat under the fluorescent lights. Tank's testimony took 3 days. Every detail, every lie, every dollar of blood money. When it was finished, he felt hollowed out but clean, like a wound that had finally been drained of poison. Emma sat in the gallery behind him, her face unreadable. She'd listened to everything, the gambling debts, the cover-up, the 20 years of deception. Tyler was too young to understand, staying with friends during the trial, but someday Tank would have to explain to his grandson why Grandpa had gone away for a while. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts, including 2 counts of murder in the first degree. Sarah Morrison's death, and her father's rigging accident 2 years earlier. Kellerman got life without parole. Tank got 18 months in minimum security plus 5 years probation. It felt like getting off easy. Present day. Tank's new trailer was smaller than the old one, parked in a different part of the Mojave where the sunsets painted the rocks purple and gold. He'd been out for 8 months now, working part-time at a motorcycle repair shop in Lancaster, trying to build something honest from the wreckage of his old life. The knock on his door came at sunset, soft and hesitant. Emma stood on his makeshift porch, Tyler peeking out from behind her legs. The boy had grown during Tank's time away, taller, more serious, but still clutching a new drawing in his small fist. "Hey, Dad." Emma's voice was careful, testing. "Can we come in?" Tank stepped aside wordlessly. Tyler ran to the kitchen table and spread out his drawing, a crayon family standing in front of a house. 2 adults, a child, and an older man with gray hair. "That's Grandpa," Tyler announced proudly. He made a mistake, but he told the truth about it. "Mommy says that's what brave people do." Tank's throat closed up. He looked at Emma, seeing forgiveness in her eyes that he'd never dared hope for. "We brought dinner," Emma said, holding up a bag from Tyler's favorite restaurant. "If you want company." Tank nodded, not trusting his voice. They ate at the small table as the desert stars emerged overhead. Tyler chattered about school, about his loose tooth that finally fell out, about the quarter the tooth fairy had left under his pillow. Emma talked about work, about the new apartment they'd found closer to Tank's trailer. When Tyler fell asleep on the couch, Emma and Tank stepped outside to watch the night sky. "I'm proud of you," Emma said quietly, "for telling the truth. Finally." Tank thought about Sarah Morrison, about Margaret Morrison dying without knowing her daughter's real killer, about Jimmy Castellanos and Maria Santos, silenced before they could speak. Some truths came too late to save everyone. But Tyler would grow up knowing his grandfather as a man who'd made terrible choices and found the courage to face them. That had to count for something. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the desert vastness. Tank listened to their wild voices and felt, for the first time in 20 years, like he belonged among the living.